I've been staring at this painting, thinking about how I was going to go forward with it. And the more I got looking at it, the more I realized that I had been presenting this as a vertical, and it's lovely as a vertical, but the shadows actually work better when it's a horizontal. So I'm pretty sure I took this photograph as a horizontal. So I'll continue working on it in the horizontal way. There's a sidewalk seam here that I'm removing from the painting. One of my students had asked about it, and as a vertical it looks totally wrong. But when you do see it in the horizontal, it does look right to be there. So that said, now how am I going to move forward with this? I'm thinking that I want to have, remember I put a little tiny thin layer of yellow in underneath of here, and if I come in with a very thin layer of purple on top of this, it will make it gray. I just have to be careful of my balance, so that has to be a very thin layer. Now the greens up in here, there's greens and there's browns up in here, there's light and dark patterns. What I'm going to plan on doing is coming in first with the lighter shade of greens that I'm seeing there and lighter shades of brown with a loose wet and wet of those two colors up in this area. We'll let that dry, and then I'll come back and I'll start creating detail by doing the darker parts of that. So let's dive in, see where we're going to go with this. Let's see, I'm going to put this picture here. You may not be able to see it, but in the video you'll get to see it. Okay, I've got my water, I've got my rag, I've got my brushes. What do I want to start with? Let me start with the greens and the browns up here at the top, and then we'll think about this purple down on the bottom, because I don't want my hand to come in across this wet part. So greens. I have some greens mixed up here from a previous painting that I don't know as I want. Let's see, this is sap green right here. Sap green. Sap green is a little too yellow. Where's my sample? It's a little too yellow. But if I add ultramarine blue to it, let's add some ultramarine blue in here. Yeah, ultramarine blue, it's going to get a nice blue-green. Maybe I'm almost feeling like I need to put a little tiny bit of sap green back in there. Let's, is that, yeah, maybe that one's better. All right, so now this area up in here, and now I'm also going to have some browns up in there. There's sort of two shades of brown. I got some yellow. This is New Gamboge in my pan. Let me add burnt sienna to it. And then the other brown I'm thinking I might want to use is my raw umber. Let's add a little bit of blue to this. A little bit of, once again, ultramarine blue is lovely. Ultramarine blue is going to make a little bit more of a neutral, a little darker neutral brown. A little too gray. Okay, back to a little tiny bit more burnt sienna in there. I've got pretty wet paint in my burnt sienna because I just reloaded it yesterday. And then let me just wet up my area here that's got my raw umber in it. I think that's raw umber. But sort of a yellow brown. Yeah, I think that'll work. Okay, so now how do I want to deal with this? Let's start with a little bit of this raw umber in this area right here. Working with relatively wet paint so that this can be a wet and wet combination. And then let's just add more water to this. As I get in closer to these flowers, I'm going to come in and define those flowers with this wash. So they're just going to come in right next to those flowers and start finding the shape of them. And so this is where I can play with getting a little nicer shape. And then I got to pull that into that wet area. Take that right out to my edges. I probably, this paper is, although it's on a block, the block is starting to disintegrate on me a little bit. Let me just go ahead and put some brown in here. Ooh, and I gotta be careful. I've got somebody here that I don't want to have disappear. There's a stem there, and although he's going to be green later, he's so light. I think I'm going to just paint around him like I do the flowers and come back and get him later. If I do it now, since I've got a little bit of sort of brown on my brush, and let's see here. That's a little too harsh. There we go. Round it out just a little bit. I could have done even more pre-wetting here, which reminds me that I really should come in and just start painting fairly wet. We're coming up on the other side of this guy. Painting around all these flowers is sort of slow, so I'm having to think about where I start and stop on things. We've got brown up in here. And as I come to a place where I could stop, I'm just doing a little uneven painting so that I have a nice intersection for when I come back and paint again. And these stems, although they're going to be green, because I've got brown there as well, I'm leaving some of that out. Okay, now let's get a little bit more greenish. That's more brown in there, but this is greenish in here. So let's just, and greenish down into this area down here. Up to the base of that flower. And then let's just make a little slightly soft edge on here with a little damp. I'm going to have it come through the other side of that just a little bit, even though it's not in the picture. Once again, this is greenish up in here. There's brown in underneath of there, but I can turn green into brown pretty quickly, but I can't turn brown into green. That whole game of, it's easy to dull colors down, but not to bring them bright again. So once you've started putting the opposite color in, it's going to dull it down, and it will make it so that you don't have your bright colors. So you got to be very careful about where you want to have those crisp, bright colors and not paint over those. Let's see, this can go a little darker brown up in here. There's going to be some shadows up in there, but those are coming in later. I don't care about them yet. We can put a little more green into this, make this a little more uneven, and I just sort of want to bring it in similar to the patterns that I'm seeing there. There's California poppies have got very interesting leaf structure, and we'll try and capture more of that later, but right now I'm just trying to get the feeling of branches. And then this is going to stay green down in here. Gotta be careful coming around this flower. And then quickly, while it's still wet, pull it away. And then be careful around the next flower. Oops, I don't want that line to stop there. Let's grab this one too. And I'm just going to leave that uneven easy to come in and grab that uneven. I'm just seeing here and feeling like it was not the way I wanted it. We're going to be green up to here. And then there's a little bit coming out of here. And I'll soften the edge of that in a minute. But while I've still got paint on my brush, I'm just bringing this in here, find the edge of this flower. And then I said I wanted to soften the edge of this, so let's just come in with a little thinner and just soften that. And then it's darker green in between these. Just adding a little bit of water to that. I wonder, I've got some other green mixed here that it was a darker green, but still, let me just add a little bit of ultramarine blue to that. Ah, yeah, I think that feels good. Yes, no, maybe. Sap green. Back up to there, okay. Getting this balance right is sometimes difficult. So let's see, these flowers are these flowers. This is all going to be green down in here, down to about this point, and then it's going to shift to a purple shadow. I've got to be careful not to let this be too dark yet, because I still want those lighter greens to show through, and if I make this too dark now, then my lights won't show when I go to put my next layer on. So I'd be a little bit careful about making this too dark. And I want this shape improved. There we go, I like that shape better. Now what's happening down here? Those are that. Okay. And we're going to be down to about here. Just trying to get a little feeling of those broken branches without getting into detail. It's going to get much darker by the time we have our next layer on there. But that now gets us a sense of that green. Now I'm going to be making purple down in here, and I need a space. I want to save that orange because, let's see. Maybe I'll pull the brown so I can use that space for purple. And actually, it's not going to be a bright, bright purple. I can leave a little bit of that brown in there. And quinacridone rose. And I think I'm going to use the ultramarine blue. Nice to keep that same blue working through and underneath of all of these. So this is a purple. I'm gonna dull that even more. Okay, I'm gonna have to be really thin with this. Yeah, that's about how thin it's gotta be. Just debating whether or not I should have been using my flat brush for putting this down. I've got to really work quickly here. Let's get the flat brush on here because this needs to be fairly smooth, and if I don't get this with a bunch of water fairly smooth, it's not going to be. It'll be all brush marks, and I don't want all brush marks. And just a wee touch of purple in here. going to have to come back in quickly with my brush next to those flowers to get the edges with the flowers, but I wanted to get this down and working, and just a wee touch of purple in here. Get all the way to the edge of the page. If I don't, then we have marks at the edge of that page. And then while this is still wet, I need to come back in with my round brush that I can control things a little bit more and find the edge of these flowers. Now, it's going to go much, much darker where these shadows are in underneath of these flowers, so I don't have to worry about having it perfect at this point, because we're going to come back in with a much darker layer of shadow in here. And then the intersection between that and that green. Well, I got these flowers pretty close with that flat brush. That's pretty good, Margaret. This was the one area where I needed to work on it. It's this little flower here, a little bud. And this is purple right up in here and up to that point on that green. Get that pulled off of there. Okay, I think I need to stop at this point, let this dry completely, and it's going to dry lighter than it is. Is it too purple now? I could pick just a wee touch off if I think it's a little too strong on the purple. Okay, let it dry, Margaret. Stop, let it all dry. And we're going to come back in, we'll work on the flowers, we'll work on more dark greens. Right now, this is the point where a painting just feels like it's not going to come together, that it's sort of all mid-tones and a little bit ugly, but it will change. My next stage on this, I have to make a choice. Do I want to work some more on the background? Do I want to work on the flowers? And I'm going to work on the flowers because I can use the background to do the final definition of the outside of those flowers. But if the flowers aren't done before I do that, then I'm going to be struggling a little bit with it. Now, I do have a few places here where I feel like I got a little bit dark on my first round. This is lovely and light, that's lovely and light. This guy's pretty light, but in here, I want to make this a little bit lighter, and I'm hoping that this will lift with my brush. Let's just dampen that a little bit, so that petal, yeah, that's nice and light up there. That's good. There's another light space down in here. Okay, now let me just come in on with my brush, and I'm going to rub and rub on here. And when I do, I should be able to get some of this to lift. If I can't, my next motion is Mr. Clean Magic Eraser. So let's just see what we did here. Does that feel like that's lightened up enough? Yeah, compared to that, that's looking much better. Let's just leave that alone. Now I also want to go a little bit lighter down in here, so let's just do this. Get that wet. Get this petal here wet a little bit. Get that nice and wet. And I'm going to do a little bit here in the center too, because the stamens inside there are actually lighter than the flower, and I would like that to be able to stand out. So I need to lighten up that center area just a touch, which I should do the same thing here. Let's just lighten up this center area a little tiny bit more. I can always get it darker again, but it's hard to get it light again. So let's do that little lift. And that's pretty good there. Yeah, we'll just do a little lift on that. I don't like this green thing right here. Let's get that green off of there. And this edge can be nice and light. And I don't like that green bit that got over that edge there. And what about over in here? Those all look pretty light. I did a pretty good job of that light. Let's just maybe lighten this a hair over here. Okay. You know, I might just work the yellow directly out of the pan here. Do I want to use the new gamboge? Do I want to use, I'm going to use a little bit of Aurelian yellow just to get a little brighter, lighter yellow on things. So I'm going to come in here and throw just a little yellow in here. And it's going over this orange that's there. So I don't want to do it too thick, because if I do it too thick, it's going to just get heavy looking on there. But it's going to help make this a little brighter feeling. And once again, this a little yellow on there. And let's just run that down in there further. A little light on that edge with a little more yellow on it. Make this a little more yellow there. And ones that I did a little lift on, bring that in a little more yellow. Now, one thing I don't have, missing having any real bright white in here. I had originally thought we were going to leave a little more light on the edge of these petals, and I've got to be careful not to go too dark with this yellow, because I do want that lighter. Maybe this needs a little lift. Yeah, this edge needs a little lift on it. And now we're going to put a little bit more yellow in around here. And a little more yellow all the way in on the bottom of these. And let's not get too much off of that edge. It's going to go darker there, but all right. That feels pretty good. That feels pretty good. All right, so now starting to build in some of these flowers. I do want some of these center stamens to stand out, but I've got to think about how that's going to happen. I had this lovely orange that I made, and maybe we can make a little more of it. Remember, it was made with new gamboge and quinacridone rose. So let me soften up my new gamboge here, which is still dirty from having mixed it before. So some of that color is probably going to be just about right. It's got a lot of yellow already in, or yellow, it's got a lot of the red already in it, the quinacridone rose. And do I need more quinacridone rose in there? Let's sample. No, I think this is good the way it is. Okay, let me start over here. Now, there's a shadow that runs back behind this one petal, and if I paint that shadow in, my brush had a little bit too much paint on it, and now we're going to do this shadow and all around here, and then it's going to find its way between some of these stamens in the middle. Some of them are light, some of them are darker, so I need to paint around some and then paint some a little bit dark. And then a little bit of a shadow runs up onto there. Now I want to grade this just a hair, and then we'll probably make it a little bit darker in part of it. So this is going to grade so we get that glow that runs up across that petal. Nice. This one is a hard edge, but let me just get rid of some of that. That's a hard edge off of there. Let's just, okay, that's gonna run down into there. And then there's a few little, wrinkles in these. So we have a little bit of a dark line, a couple little dark lines that run down in through here, and those are wrinkles that run down in through there. Now let's go just a little bit darker. I need to get a little quinacridone rose in here and just drop a little bit of darker down into the base of this. Just while it's wet and wet. This can go just a little bit darker there, and maybe a little bit there. And then leave that flower alone, except for one little thing here. There we go. There's another flower in the photograph, but I am ignoring it. Now we're going to move on to this flower here. So it's nice and yellow out here. It's darker in there. And it's got a light edge to the petal right up on that one side, and a bit of a shadow that runs across through there, slightly darker there. Okay, I'm going to grade this just a little bit. I'm going to grade this edge just a little bit, dry my brush, just bring a damp brush in along there to grade that. And then it's going to go darker in that center. So I'm just making a little pile of orange with the quinacridone rose sort of up in the corner of here so that I've got a darker piece to work with. And so then this is going to go darker in here and all the way across through there. And I'll just let that sort of bleed into there. This whole part of this is a little bit darker, and there's a darker part of that petal right there. Okay, so now this little guy, and he's dark around the bottom. Let's pull a little bit of orange on here. And I might have to come back in and do a little bit more work in the middle of that guy. But I'm also feeling like maybe that's a little bit red looking. And then let's lighten this in the center of that and let that go darker all the way out to that edge. It's not really light on that edge. Okay. I'm just trying to get the basic feel for the way these are. There's a little light in that center. This comes up into here. Now these petals, some of them have light edges on them, and then there's sunlight on other parts of it. And so it helps sort of distinguish from one petal to the next. It sometimes seems a little strange when you paint it down. But when you look at it from a distance, the whole thing looks correct. And then this is a little lighter up around that top edge. And then I need a darker piece right down in here. And this is going to be a little bit darker in the base of here, and a little bit darker in the base of there. And walk away from it, leave it alone. Okay, so those three. Now, this is sort of my center of interest, so I need to be paying attention. One petal behind here, so we come in from the back side and paint from behind. And then I'm going to leave that edge dry as I paint up toward it. If I want to let one little piece bleed through, that would be fine, but I don't want more than just just that one little piece bleed through. Nice with a little bit more orange on here. Now let's see, I need to soften these pieces just a hair so you get that feeling of it looking a little velvety. And then my next one here is just a little bit on it. And more importantly, those stamens down here start coming across that lighter place. And it's a little bit darker behind this petal, but it's light at the edge. There's some lighter stamens that come across there. And, okay, we want this not the way I had it drawn, but a little bit different. And then this is going to have some more there. I want to add yellow to the edge here. Yellow to the edge there. And then let's soften that. And a little bit darker right here in this center. We'll just let that bleed out into what's there. And then a little darker right here and here. I need to be sure that this is not wetter as I get darker with it. Okay. I can come back and do a little bit more work in that center later, but that gets me, yeah, that's good. And like that. Okay. Now down in here, this is quite a bit darker. Oh, Margaret, you shouldn't have done that. I needed to let that dry. I'm gonna have to come in with my rag and dry this edge, or this is all gonna bleed up into here. I should have waited on that area until that was totally dry. Okay, so this is staying nice and yellow over here, except for a little dark underneath of there, but I'm going to grab that after I get more of this off of my brush. As I learned from up there, it was hard. If I had too much on my brush, it didn't want to go down nicely. And up to that petal there. And then maybe some light bits into that stamen. And now that I've got most of this off my brush, I can come in and do that little space back there. That's the shadow area. So shadows are not gray. They're just darkened versions of whatever our color is. So that places in these flowers that are in shadow are a darker version of what this, so this guy's in shadow and he's a darker version of what we've got up there. This is shadow right there. This is shadow right up in here. And is that dry? This feels like it just needs a little more orange in on here. And then a little darker right there. There, I think that'll dry better. there's a shadow that runs back in behind there. And there's some little wrinkles. Well, actually, this all needs to go just a little darker. And then I'm going to have to come back in and do that shadow later. There's going to be little wrinkles that come out of that. And let's add a little more yellow right in here, right in there. Get a little more yellow there. Just, I've got to be careful about getting too dark of yellow on there. I want it to glow without looking heavy. It's going to have to dry a little bit, and then we'll come in and I'll do some more darker bits in there. I think I have to let it dry. Let's see if we can feed a little bit in right now. Yeah. And now this one, it's going to go darker there, and then we're going to feed a little bit more dark up into here. Oh yeah, I like that better. And that's that. This is going to have to dry a little bit more before I do anything more to it, I believe. Yeah, that's got to get dry a little bit more. This one. Let's see, we've got a shadow that runs across through there. And then this one here is a little bit darker. It's going to have a darker end on it, but we'll worry about that later. Let that dry just a little bit. And then we're going to come in and add this darker here. I also seen just the way that shadow is formed. The rest of that will stand out more when that background goes in, and there's got to be a little bit more work done on that flower. Okay, so now it's these three, there's two there, a lot of yellow on them. Let's come in and find this stamens that are light. And then that goes up into there. There's a break. And that goes up into there. Might end up with prettier flowers in here. Still too wet. The edge of this petal's going to stand out if I make it dark next to it with the one underneath. Got a little shadow area there. Oh, in my picture it's something different. Let's see, new gamboge, and put it on rose. More new gamboge. Okay, and just finding the edge of things and letting something light, and I can come back in and put another layer on top of here if I need to. This is feeling like it needs to go a little more yellow as it comes out into here. Let's go ahead and blend some yellow into there. I'm gonna let those dry. That's a shadow there, but we can have a little bit of this come up into there. Okay, and that side's going to go darker, but in the meantime I want to let this be, and I'll come back and grab it later. So some of these petals are maybe going to stand out a little too much, and then let's see here. I need to let those stamens. This is going to go all the way out to this edge out here. And then let's get a little more dark dropped into here. Now I need to come back in and find a little more darkness in a few places over here. Center that can get a dot. This one was pretty good except for little shadow spots here, and then this can go even darker down in here. I'm going to make this a little darker right there. And let's make that a little darker there. These are slightly different than what my photograph is, but that's okay. This guy here needs to go darker. It's always this question, you know, would it have been better if we had used a different red? I really like using quinacridone rose, but sometimes it doesn't seem to make as dark of an image when it dries as I would have liked. So I might be sorry that that was my pick. Now, if I had used vermilion or cadmium red in my mixture, it would have made it a little thicker and perhaps would have made a better, I've got to be careful here, something that's not right. Yeah, that's got to come and follow the shape of that petal. It wasn't following the shape of the petal. Oh, and we had one other spot here that needed to get a shadow behind it, which is right there, and then come down and be almost zero. Let's make that shadow a little wider there. And where else did we need to really work the shadows? This needs to go even darker in here. And even a little darker in there. These flowers are starting to come together. Now let's get a little more quinacridone rose in my mixture, get this a little darker so that I can get these guys. Now, I want those guys to be a little bit light. There we go. And then spread this out. Which one did we actually make the best job on? This glow, it's a little darker right there and a little lighter underneath here. And that's part of what makes something glow, is sort of seeing those differences. And now, where am I here? I'm working on this flower right here. Let's get a shadow running up across this. And a little darker right there. And then let's just a touch of red, touch more red down in here to really get that a little bit darker right in the base. And while it's wet, then it's going to run out just a little bit and it'll create this beautiful little spot in there. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. That little dark center to this. And let's just get some of this a little bit darker. The sky needs to get a little darker right in here. Bring it in on those light pieces. And maybe add just a little more yellow. Pull out a little bit of dark out of that corner. And a beautiful little shadow right here. And a beautiful little shadow right there. These guys are not going to be this pale. I want to come in and just do a layer over the top of that once that dried. Maybe even add a little more yellow to that mixture. And here too. And then let's get this a little darker in here. One last place over here. Let's get this flower just a little bit more. Down in there. And I think I'm about done. Remember, this one's not the center of interest. We wanted our center of interest over there, and hopefully we have it over there where we want it. Just yellow. I also need it light. And once I get dark back behind there, then we'll really get that a whole lot lighter. Let me put a little yellow right around in here. And not that much. Lighten it up just a little bit so that we get a glow of yellow without it being let's see, we can hit those with a little yellow. They're going to go green, but a little yellow underneath of them is not going to hurt them. And we have a green. Oh, I have some over there. I didn't get my flower painted in. We have one more flower down here that I didn't get painted the other day that needs to be part of this. And it's important because it's going to pull us down into here. And it has a green stem coming out to it. It's going to go darker on that side. It's going to go darker in here. It's going to go darker on that side. And some of that petal is is a little darker. Okay, Margaret, stop, I do believe. Does that look weird there? Let's do just a wee touch more yellow. Maybe not that much. Careful about how much. Just that little turn of that petal, and then it's going to go even darker into that inside. Pull just a wee touch of purple. It's getting me a little darker. I just put a hair of purple into that. Just feeling like it needed a little something to pull it across here and get a little more dark in the dark places. Okay, I think I have to stop on that. Stop, and then our next thing is going to be to work on the background, which will help pull these all out. Because right now, my value between this background, which comes out, oh, it's somewhere in here, is very similar to what I have on those flowers. The flowers are maybe one shade darker, but we want that background to be several shades darker. So when we come in on these flowers, they are somewhere in that range, but the background, look at how dark that background is. It's down in here, so it's 4 or 5 shades darker. So it's gonna go quite a lot darker in the back there to really get that to work.